Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing Starmada versus the jurisdictional command of Corregidor, and the scenario is Mindwipe. And as a bonus, we'll probably cover a couple of other just battle reports in short at the end, because there were some performances with this list over the course of a 3-round event that I'd really like to show off how certain other models did, because there were some real banger experiences with different aspects of different lists I played with the faction. But the primary focus will be on the first game, which is Mindwipe against JSA. Now, this list and the second list that I'll show off in short in a couple of other games is inspired by a challenge from channel supporter Mickey, who made the request for Starmada playing without a Zeta. Now, that's not really an impost in N5. I played Starmada a fair bit during N4, but I played them almost exclusively kind of mono-build, heavily mechanized, roadbots and Ochre Copper bots, and the Zeta as the basis of the force. That is an archetype that still works totally serviceably, but there are other ways that you can play Starmada, in particular this kind of list, and we'll see a sort of similar version of the list in the subsequent games, which is really the multiple small fire teams, because Starmada has just a lot of potential in its small teams and independent operators running multiple 2- and 3-person teams to have link bonuses all over the place, but actually able to spread out and cover a lot of ground. So going through, this is a list built specifically for Mindwipe. There are pieces in here that I wouldn't necessarily always fit, but Starmada, while it absolutely can do Mindwipe, it wants to just flex into it a little bit. You don't always build Starmada lists that just trivially accomplish the mission. Some factions do have that luxury. Some factions just are swimming in DACCWs, for example. Starmada is not, but it also doesn't struggle to accomplish Mindwipe. It just needs to focus on it a little bit in list construction. So the list is... Now, technically, these first 5 troopers can be a 5-person security corps. The Psychop, Shonakarano, the Kappa, and then 2 Raven Eyes. One is the lieutenant, one is a decoy. In practice, it is going to start the game as a Haris or Corps, featuring the Kappa Hacker, because you need a Kappa to form the security corps, Shona Carano, and the Psychop. The Psychop, despite wildcarding in, counts as a security, which means that it gets at least duo bonuses, and then I'll just add in whatever Raven Eye is nearby with the expectation of leaving them behind. Over the course of any given game, I will also pretty comfortably just fling Shona off to accomplish something at some point during an order, because really the only 2 important pieces here are the Psychop and the Kappa. Those give you the duo bonuses. The Kappa is a useful specialist. The Psychop is also a specialist, can do a lot of classifieds, but is a serviceable gunfighter. It's a Mimetism 3, Ballistic Skill 13, MSV 1, so just reasonably well-rounded, multi-marksman rifle with +1 special die as long as the Kappa is nearby. Now, multi-marksman rifles are right on that level of firepower that, frankly, they can absolutely let you down, because damage 7, even armor piercing, it's just damage 7. But getting up to effective burst 4 is kind of enough to make them worthwhile in a pinch, even if they're not the same, for example, as a TAG's HMG. They are okay as weapons. And the other thing that the Psychop brings, which I particularly wanted to try out and was particularly happy with, was the armed turret with a Thunderbolt. Now, there are a couple of really interesting turret options in Starmada and O12, but the Thunderbolt turret has very much had my eye. Turrets, just kinda in generally, I am increasingly coming around to there probably needs to be some small rule change to turrets just to limit their proliferation, because in particular in the third game, which we'll cover in brief, there was a serious issue with defensive debt build-up that happened that kind of just didn't exactly lock my opponent out of the game, but it was one of those games that people play that occur against turrets where the combination of a bit of good luck and a bit of tilt led to a situation that was just not recoverable, and the material advantage I built up just by throwing those things out was too significant. That said, turrets generally, they are currently part of the game, and Thunderbolt turrets are particularly interesting. And the reason is that most turrets, when they are deployed, they have relatively constrained range bands. We have another turret in this list, we have the Lambda, which has the adhesive turret, and while that turret is potentially backbreaking because it inflicts a mobility kill on whatever it hits, adhesive ammunition is not to be trifled with, it has very constrained range bands, which means that an awful lot of the time it's going to be outranged or zoned out, hitting on 4s or hitting on 1s or not able to hit at all. It's quite easy to put an adhesive turret in a situation where it's very, very difficult for it to hit. The Thunderbolt turret is almost never zoned out of shooting because a Thunderbolt's range bands are extremely forgiving. It shares a range band with a Feuerback, it starts being good from 16 inches and stays good out to 32, but more importantly, and why I'm interested in it, it also stays to a zero range band out to 48. And what that means is that the Cyclops Thunderbolt turret can be placed almost anywhere on the table to have good effect, but in particular it can be placed watching long range bands, and it can be placed in the far back of the deployment zone, looking out across the table, able to do things like put enemy weapons that might be brought up to deal with it, enemy HMGs, in a -3 range band. And this means that it is still dangerous enough, it's only damage 6, but it is still dangerous enough that infantry can't just walk through center fire unprotected, but it becomes very difficult to dislodge even with things like tactical armored gears if they aren't engaging it at 32 inches. If you take a tag and you spin it up and you are forced to engage this Thunderbolt turret at 33 inches, well, the tag is going to be hitting on something like 8s while the Thunderbolt will be hitting on 7s, and that's still a favored engagement for the tag, but it's very easy for that fight to have a null outcome, for nothing to happen. And all it takes is a couple of orders where nothing happens for the turn your opponent would otherwise be taking to really begin to just get away from them. And as it's happened over 4 games with Starmada, 3 of which we'll cover today, that Thunderbolt turret has been a pretty significant performer. Now, there is one other Thunderbolt turret I'm aware of that you can access in Starmada. It's on an engineer. That's good. It's on a jackboot engineer. That's bad. There's actually nothing wrong with that jackboot profile other than the fact that it is 9 points more expensive than the Lambda. There was a significant difference between the performance of those adhesive turrets and the performance of the Thunderbolt turrets. I may consider trying to find those 9 points to get the 28-point jackboot because it really made a difference. But regardless, Thunderbolt turrets are now up there in terms like equivalent just about to things like marksman turrets in terms of just sheer annoyance from deployable equipment. My opponents, not fans. I liked them, but we are really beginning to see just if you know what you're doing with turrets and you start taking the ones that really maximize the potential for just difficulty to remove them, they really overperform. Anyway, that's the Psychop. Good piece for 30 points. Shono Carano is Shono Carano, one of the most dangerous CC combatants in the game. One of the things that this list has is it's got a problem trying to kill really heavy armor. There are a few pieces that can neutralize enemy heavy stuff, but a lot of it is just neutralization. It's things like electromagnetic weapons. The Psychop, for example, trying to fight a tag, it's going to take an awful long time, even with armor-piercing rounds, because the damage of marksman rifles is low. Shono Carano, if you get her into CC, she will just delete something. She is incredibly dangerous. I had one face-to-face roll in close combat, I think, with her over the course of any of the games I played with her, but there is just something about saying, that'll be 7 saves, if you please, on power and strength 4 armor piercing. Anything she hits, she deletes, and since we are building this list for Mindwipe, the ability to, I think, possibly more reliably than any other model in the game, one round an objective, is a pretty big deal. We then have a Kappa hacker. The Kappa, as I mentioned, is necessary in order to form the fire team. It's also a 13-point hacker. It's not great. It's totally fine. 2 Raven Eyes are the Mind Layer would be very relevant in almost all of the missions that I'm playing, but particularly in Mindwipe. The Raven Eye Mind Layers in Mindwipe give you that deployment zone defense, and Mindwipe, more than any scenario, actually really appreciates deployment zone defense. Your opponent has to penetrate the DZ in order to accomplish the mission, just about, which means that having electromagnetic mines placed about your deployment zone is a really big deal and would be a really big deal this game. We then have a duo that has been an MVP over multiple games I've played with it. This is the Epsilon Heavy Machine Gun and Beta Trooper Doctor. Now, I don't know if I can say I would put these in every single Starmada list, but smoke shooting is really good this edition. It is more and more difficult to access Sixth Sense as a skill. In fact, to my knowledge, there is exactly one person who I play against regularly who is getting ahead of the curve and beginning to put it back in lists, and that is Ed playing White Company, specifically because he is well aware that sooner or later I am going to get completely fed up of trying to fight John Hawkwood in a fire team and bring weapons that can put Hawkwood down. And one of the best ways that you can put down John Hawkwood in anything short of a 5-person Fusilier link is with good quality smoke shooting. So of course Ed is taking a 5-person Fusilier link to get ahead of that particular metagame. He has played Knifey Spoony before, but even then the Epsilon is still a reasonably good face-to-face roll and has a chance of forcing Hawkwood prone. And against anything else, look, it's just good quality smoke shooting. Mimetism, MSV2, can see through smoke, can shoot through smoke. And with the Beta Trooper duoing with it, it has a doctor behind it, and a close assault piece, and a good specialist, and it's rolling 5 dice, or 4 plus a special die. I don't really need to explain why this fire team is good. It is expensive, right? It's coming in at 61 points in total for the two of them, but just consistently across every game, that has been worthwhile. You have everything that you might want except smoke grenades to deal with, help to assist the Epsilon and get the team forward, and all you need to do is just butt off a Varangian Guard and dedicate the Varangian Guard to helping them out. We then have a model that is going to be very important this game, but will not significantly do anything active, but which across 3 other games with Starmada over the last weekend, I have really enjoyed, and that's Andromeda. And actually, frankly, the reason why I'm covering the other games, in particular the third game, in brief, is just because I want to showcase what Andromeda can do. Now, she is a model that went through some high highs and low lows in N4, and I feel like a lot of our thinking about her is still rooted in that history, even though it's a new edition. I remember when she came out, and she would just land on enemy deployment zones, very high chance of success, and then would just guard her way through everything, murdering it to death. She was an absolute terror for a very short period, before her ability to infiltrate was nerfed back to only being able to succeed on 12s, at which point everyone just kind of abandoned her. Because, not unreasonably, if you don't get to deploy to begin aggressively attacking with her guard attacks immediately, in N4, she was 4-4 move, and moving silhouette 4 bases in N4 with 4-4 move was a fucking nightmare. That's changed in this edition. 2 things about Andromeda have changed. The first thing, actually, I think, is just that she's a little cheaper, but more importantly, she is 6-2 move, and 6-2 move is the baseline of this profile functions as a Silhouette 4 model. If you are a 4-4 Silhouette 4 model, you kind of have to consign yourself to just never getting anywhere significantly. Looking at new Bayram Palace Guard in Imperial service, right? Those things are consigned to the deployment zone and they're probably not leaving it. Andromeda, in addition to infiltrating, superior infiltrating on 12s to the enemy deployment zone if she wants to, is 6-2 move. And 6-2 move doesn't seem like a big difference, even though it's 50% faster on the first move, obviously. But 6-2 move reaches the point where, as you begin to move around corners, you can take advantage of the fact that in Infinity N5, the game has legalized clipping through corners, basically. The squeezing rules can be applied at any time. A model only has to have half of its silhouette supported on the table at any given point, which means that you are legally entitled to cut corners. And while that makes almost no difference on a Silhouette 2 model moving around a corner, it makes a big difference on a Silhouette 4 or Silhouette 7 model moving around a corner. And this means that Andromeda is no longer horrifically immobile. She can just deploy normally, kind of in the midfield, hang out, defend something, because she's a dangerous defensive troop, and then potentially move out and attack. And the fact that she has Guard and a Zapper, we'll see the effect of that in Game 3. Anyway, good piece. 30 points is a sometimes food. You can't just fit 10% of your list into that model every single game, but I have found that I really enjoy her, and I would definitely encourage other people to take her as well. Next up, we have a Sarko, and Sarkos are a profile that I do not love in N5. They're not bad, but Ballistic Skill 11 is Ballistic Skill 11. If I am looking at midfield skirmishers, I want them to ideally be able to do a variety of things, and in the absence of a template weapon, the boarding shotgun on that Sarko has a higher chance than I would like of letting you down, which kind of just relegates it to being a killer hacker, and for 24 points I could get a much cheaper and better killer hacker, admittedly one that doesn't start in a marker state, in the form of a cyber ghost. However, we are playing Mindwipe, and in Mindwipe, firstly, in the most recent version of Mindwipe, there has been a change, at least as far as Comlog is telling me, which is that you can now have your Uber hacker on the table as a model or a marker, which means that the Sarko can be picked to be your Uber hacker, and if you're going second, it gives it a much better chance of surviving an enemy hacking alpha strike. But then in addition, it's got infiltration, which means it can just start on one of the consoles and open the console, which is a huge deal. And it's got decharges. Now, the Uber hacker obviously has the hacking program that lets it attack enemy servers. It doesn't necessarily need to be using decharges, but as it moves forward towards servers making those hacking attacks, just access to decharges is really nice. And so, specifically in the context of Mindwipe, the Sarco is a piece that I thought I should take because it plays really well to the scenario. We've then got a Fuzzbot. You need baggage in this list because you're throwing out turrets, and that leads us on into Combat Group 2, which is a kind of like defensive/utility team. We have a Thunderbolt Total Reaction Bot and an Engineer. The Engineer has no friends, it's just going to be hanging out near the Thunderbolt. And the Engineer's job will be to spend 1 or 2 orders every turn repairing the Thunderbolt if it's down and placing a turret. That's literally it. That's its entire job. Serviceable for 19 points. We have a single Varangian Guard. I would like more. I have more in the other list, but in this case I was constrained. But that Varangian, his job is to hang out with the Epsilon team because I need smoke to smoke shoot. We then have a duo, and this is probably the best way to use roadbots. We have the Tactical Awareness Oko and the Roadbot Paramedic in Combat Group 2. Now, being in Combat Group 2 is it's not a constraint for these pieces. I have 6 orders to spend on them potentially, but the Roadbot is really, really fast, and the Oko is also fast. And because you're not necessarily trying to launch close assaults with the Roadbot, you just are trying to do utility things and be annoying and accomplish mission objectives, and they have ample orders for that. The other thing that the Roadbot does, this specific Roadbot profile, is it has a Panzerfaust. And because it has a Panzerfaust and it's linked, it gets the +1 special die, which doesn't consume an extra charge, which means it gets 2 shots of the Panzerfaust before it needs to reload, which is usually enough for ARO purposes. That Roadbot is actually a fairly sneaky, potentially quite dangerous ARO piece, especially if you have it near your baggage. And in the other list that I played today, which we'll cover in brief, you will see a secondary Roadbot duo in the primary group, which has the Marksman Rifle Shotgun, and I used it, but I wasn't particularly impressed with it, because Roadbots at the end of the day are very, very hackable. Having a pair of remotes going on an attack is just asking to be Oblivioned or Carbonated. And so it's kind of much better to think of the Roadbot Oko duo as utility and defense than actually necessarily really aggressively attacking. Like, if you get the option, you can. And you have the Heavy Riot Stopper and the Submachine Gun, you have the Oko bringing up the hacking area, like there's plenty of potential there, but if your opponent has anything resembling a hacking defense, then they just can't push through that, not reliably. The BTS isn't high enough, they're too susceptible, and so trying to turn an Oko Roadbot duo into an attack team, it's just not easily going to happen consistently. But defensively, in this configuration, really like that. So there are concessions in this list or adjustments in this list to be able to do the mission. We can see multiple models with decharges. We can see a model that is very, very good at killing objectives in the form of Shona. And we have a specially chosen Uber hacker just to give us a good chance of play in the mission. But otherwise, there's a ton of stuff here that is just Starmada without a Zeta rather, and I'm very happy with it. Now, playing against us today will be the Jurisdictional Command of Corregidor, being played by another Rob from Canberra. Rob is actually out of Canberra these days for work reasons, but he's back in town just for a couple of weeks, and he was able to make it to the event, and we played in round 1. Every now and again, you will have these kind of games where you're like, oh, you're playing the finals in round 1. Well, that's very convenient. And it was one of those games. Rob is a former CanCon winner, having won CanCon 2024 with Bakunin, and very, very rightly so. He's an excellent player. His games have featured on this channel just occasionally in the past because, as I mentioned, he's not always in Canberra these days. But he is building a bit of a rod for his own back, in this case with the Jurisdictional Command of Corregidor. Now, they're not a bad faction exactly. They have a lot of things about them that I like. But they are a faction that feels like it has been just a little bit left behind by time. Lots of its pieces were updated, rules were changed, it was tinkered with as N4 transitioned to N5, but the imposition of time on Corregidor kind of set in earlier in N4. It came out the gates of N4 as just a tremendous faction, able to make massive use of links. It was the link soup faction, before the designers kind of thought that they actually didn't want that to be a thing in the game. So they wound all of that back, but then that left Corregidor kind of wondering what it was, and that identity crisis has carried on over multiple editions. It is still a very scrappy faction. It's a faction with good links. It's a faction with Masai Morans, which are really annoying and powerful in this particular game, and good in this scenario. But it's also a faction that, for me, doesn't exactly click, and I feel like it's waiting for someone to champion it, if indeed it's possible to do so. Still, in this list, what we have is a 3-person Wildcat and Brigada Haris/Core. We have the Wildcat Heavy Rocket Launcher. Wildcats have got MSV1s. ballistic skill 13, and otherwise a whole lot of skills that don't really particularly do anything. Although, since we have the Wildcat Hacker here as well, in the case of Combat Instinct, that's actually kind of useful. Combat Instinct is one of the two skills that Sixth Sense became, Combat Instinct being immunity to surprise and enemy stealth doesn't affect you. So the Wildcat being able to declare hacking arrows through the hacking network even when stealth isn't up, actually, or even when stealth would otherwise apply, actually is a pretty big deal, because once you can trigger one of those hacking arrows, you kind of make the repeater network live again regardless, whereas if it was just Jazz and Billy, Jazz can be affected by stealth, and because Jazz can be affected by stealth, anything like heavy infantry with stealth can just sneak through the Moran network. But as soon as the Wildcat is present, it can start taking arrows, which kind of forces them to reset, which breaks stealth, really just makes the Morans live even when stealth would be in play, which is a really nice effect. The Mobile Brigada adds a firewall -6 to the Wildcat, but is otherwise, I mean, is 33 points for a lieutenant. I don't hate the Mobile Brigada, like that boarding pistol is nice, for example. The multi-rifle is fine, the firewall is relevant, and it's a lieutenant profile because there are just not a lot of those in Corregidor. That's one of the big weaknesses of the faction, is that it's just sitting there staring at its LT options, being like, Brigada, I guess. And in this case, Rob has paid those 33 points, which is a hell of a tax on a list, but it is doing something kind of useful in this team. We then have 3 Jaguars, which will be linked, 1 chain rifle smoke grenades, and then 2 adhesive launcher Panzerfaust smoke grenades. All of these have DACCWs, and this is one of those things where I mentioned some factions get to not do Mindwipe for free, but they come with just a little bit of chip in a chair play into the scenario, and Jaguars are that kind of thing, as is McMurrah. McMurrah has been nerfed slightly over the course of the edition. The change to immunity armor. Immunity armor is still a great skill, but McMurrah went from total immunity to immunity armor. However, his melee arguably got better, and he's still an excellent piece, and we'll see him in play this game. We then have an Intruder. I mentioned when talking about the Absalon that smoke shooting is good in this edition, and the Intruder. Intruder is some of the most expensive smoke shooting that you can take. 38 points is not cheap, but it's very good smoke shooting. You're able to -12 things by combining surprise attack, smoke, and mimetism. And having a piece in your list that can potentially take down 2 turrets in a single order is one of the ways that you can push through turret spam. We then have a Hellcat Paramedic. And this is actually, I'll say, this is a mistake on my part. The Hellcat in this case is actually one of the Hellcats with D charges because it's Mindwipe, just a very small adjustment. I think Rob ran a very similar list pair. I've copied the wrong one down, but there is a Hellcat. It will appear. It's not going to be the Paramedic profile. I imagine Rob was playing that for Countermeasures and potentially also Cryogenics. In this case, it's one of the Hellcat profiles with D charges because we're playing Mindwipe. There's one other thing I actually already see that will need to be changed in this list as well. We then have 2 Moran repeaters and a Daktari and a Zonbot. Morans are one of, particularly AVA2 Morans is one of the selling points of Corregidor, and they will be a big deal and very annoying this game. Daktari is a piece that you could take or leave under some circumstances, but as soon as you have an Intruder and then also this Wildcat in lists, you really do kind of want the Doctor, especially being able to bring the Intruder back in case of a lucky combi rifle crit or something is well worthwhile. Jazz and Billy are Jazz and Billy. They're some of the best for value hackers in hacker setups in the game. And then we have a Bandit. This is the second mistake in terms of the list that I've copied. In the version of the list that Rob will play in this game, it's going to be a Bandit forward observer in order to be able to do button pressing via infiltration. So this is just a jurisdictional command of Corregidor list. It's got some of the real high notes. I am not totally convinced by the Wildcat Haris, but on the other hand, Rob seems to have fit everything else that he wants in the list and still has access to those, so obviously working quite well. It would perform well in this game, which would be very close and come right down to the 3rd turn. So let's jump in. So the first turn and deployment is going to include some just wild swings in terms of dice rolls. And when 2 players are particularly equally matched, which Rob and I absolutely are, that really tends to have, they tend to have outside effects. I'm going to kind of dwell and point those out when they happen, but be prepared for some wild shit. The first roll, obviously, is Lieutenant roll, and it is one that I would really like to have won, Willpower 13 versus Willpower 13, but lost. Mindwipe, I much prefer going first, just because of the effect that the consoles have. There are 2 consoles across the midfield. The first one in this table is here, and the second one is up on the high ground here. And although on this table, one player can access one relatively easily, like the other, compared to the other, the thing is that the first player to press a button locks that button down, and then leaves the second button to their opponent, which means that if you get to pick if you pick which button you want to press first, then you get to really control how your opponent has to maneuver because they have to go and press the other button. And we're going to see that effect in full in this particular game, but on top of that, I would also really like to go first against CJC because Masai Moran mine layers are a huge pain in the ass. And if I can deploy my infiltrating models first, then the mine layers, the Masai Moran mine layers, can't place their crazy koalas as freely because you aren't allowed to place a deployable equipment with an enemy trooper or marker in its trigger area. And so what that means is that I can use things like Andromeda and the Sarco just to push the minefield back a little bit and buy yourself just a bit of extra operating space. But I did not win the LT roll, and so I have to deal with the fact that Rob gets to deploy first. I have picked the side on the right side of the table over here, and will obviously be deploying second. It's got marginally easier to defend servers, but it's also got slightly easier to approach objectives. There's the first objective here is very easy to approach for the second, or for Rob in this particular case, but it's still kind of in the open, whereas the objective up here on this high ground is nice-ish and sheltered. Rob will be able to cover it with a Panzerfaust and with a Masai Moran, obviously, but it just felt a little bit better. So in terms of Rob's deployment, the Masai Morans have come down. The first one is over here with its Crazy Koala. It's just a lightly conservative position, and then the second one is up here in this tower. This is going to be particularly annoying. The koala is down on the high ground behind these two buildings, but the important thing is that it really locks off the approach to the second console, and Rob, of course, will be trying to press this console on the first turn. His Wildcat team is located relatively centrally here in this building. It's going to have access to smoke from a number of different sources, but in particular McMurrah, who's the reserve drop, and we're coming down here once he knows he's safe. The bandit camouflage marker is hanging out within sort of just about striking distance of this objective. It's safe for now in case something unexpected happens, but it will be able to move up to the objective early in Rob's turn. The intruder is at ground level over here, and being a deployment zone bound camouflage marker in Corregidor, it's fairly heavily telegraphed as an intruder. And then the Jaguar team is on these rooftops and around here. They are linked up in order to provide Panzerfaust AROs, but they're also set up in a way where if Rob needs to, he can leave one of the Jaguars behind, but then pull back and have it rejoin the link for free. The Daktari, unsurprisingly, is supporting the Wildcat and Intruder core. And Jazz and Billy are hanging out on the table, topmost side of the table, just sort of like in this space up here. Jazz is relatively safe behind this barricade, and early in the turn she'll be going in Cybermask. She is going to be the Uber hacker. Now, for my part, I am already in a kind of annoying situation because Rob's got really good coverage with his koalas, and so I'm forced to deploy infiltrating pieces back or take risks with them. But we do still have to present a credible defense here. So one of the interesting things about the defensive setup of this kind of list that I am playing, where you have an engineer and a total reaction bot and a baggage bot and then other pieces that use baggage, is that the deployment tends to cascade out from itself. You really need to pick where you are starting to build your deployment, and that choice is really important. And in this case, I had two choices. The first choice was that the Thunderbolt Total Reaction Bot could have come up here on this two-story building. That would have put the engineer kind of next to it, maybe on these steps, which would put the baggage bot back here, which would have then let the rest of my baggage-based pieces spill out to about the halfway line in the deployment zone, which would have constrained my ability to defend this part of the table up here. On the other hand, if I put the turret down on this building here, in particular, it is a little bit difficult for the Wildcat to get line of sight to. I thought it was impossible, but Rob did actually find an angle, but it took a little bit more work. But then that lets me put the baggage sort of a bit further down here, which then sort of spills my turret deployment out to about there. So it's which half of the table, and you are forced when you're playing with just one baggage bot to pick a part of the table that is going to receive turret coverage. In the end, as we can see, the decision I went with was that I wanted to be able to defend sort of these 2/3 of the table a little bit more. So the turret, the total reaction bot is hanging out on this rooftop, and then we have just a selection of mines and teams, etc. The Epsilon and Beta Trooper are down here by this building. The Epsilon is on ARO, but it's just watching, so not even that far. It's watching just to see this building. This building is see into or out of, but not through. So it's just watching to see anything that might come up through here or around here, but it wants no part of the Wildcat team and does not have line of sight to them. We then have the Roadbot and Oko duo hanging out kind of down here. The Roadbot is standing. I mentioned that it's very capable of being an ARO piece. In this case, it's deployed so that it can fire off 2 Panzerfausts, go prone if it takes a hit, and then reload with the baggage bot, so it's set up to be defensive. The Sarko is deployed relatively far back. It's hanging out back here because I need it alive. It's also positioned kind of centrally because although I kind of expect Rob to take a run at this objective here, I can't guarantee it. And so I don't want to put it in a position where it's a good forward deploying hacker that can press buttons and then have the button that it's set up to press actually become unavailable. So it's deployed centrally in order to have an equal run at both, or an equal run at both consoles, and then an equal run at all 3 servers. Finally, the Psychop and team are deployed relatively far back here. The Psychop has kind of an enfilade line, like a line up through these buildings, but she's not seeing that far. I want her alive so she can place Thunderbolt turrets, and the other stuff is hanging around at ground level as well. I'm being particularly careful to sort of like watch the backfield because I'm well aware from the troop count that Rob has got, there is something that is missing from his deployment, and I'm aware of the threat of Hellcats, so we're just kind of guiding around that. And then finally, Andromeda has deployed up here. Now, she has made the decision. I could have pulled her further back to be away from the crazy koala placed by this Moran, but I decided that it would be too much I would give up too much agency and too much space, pulling her further and further back. She could have hung out back here, but that would have put her in the charging line of McMurrah, and in McMurrah's turn, that's not really a fight she wants to have. McMurrah outmatches her in melee, and will probably kill her if she tries to use guard. So this is a serviceable but not great defense. It will have to do, and Rob, of course, has first bite of the cherry, which is a really significant advantage in Mindwipe. So his turn begins with Impetuous on McMurrah, but then transitions over pretty much immediately to the Bandit. McMurrah is going to be laying smoke down in this space. The Bandit moves around. It's going to end its turn here. It will take it 3 orders to press the button. It's just a forward observer Bandit. It's not a KHD, but it'll take it 3 orders to press the button, at which point it reveals this server up here as the one that contains the AI. Now that's a little bit of luck because that is comfortably the most defended of the 2 servers. This is the second most here. The one in the middle is the second most defended. If Rob had been able to choose or had rolled this one down here, he would probably have just picked it up this turn. However, instead, he's rolled up the server that is really in the middle of all of my defenses, which firstly means it's going to be difficult to get to this turn, which he's not going to be able to, but secondly, it's going to enable me to most easily build a defense around it. Now, Mindwipe is a scenario where you absolutely do not have to kill the enemy server with the AI to win. Particularly if you get a tempo advantage in this scenario, you force your opponent to waste a lot of time trying to claw their way back into the mission. A single server of any sort can be sufficient to trip the game, which we have seen in previous reports on this channel. But I am, nevertheless, quite happy that the server that has been revealed is the one that is right in the middle of my defenses. Now, even with the Bandit having faffed around for a few orders, Rob still has plenty of gas in the tank, and so McMurrah is going to move up and continue his move up and around to here. He's just going to end up, for the moment, in this position here, behind this building. He won't quite have enough movement to carry on much further, but he'll be able to throw some more smoke grenades that enable an attack run for the Intruder. So the Intruder is going to come up and around to this building here, where it will get line of sight to the Thunderbolt turret. It'll take a couple of orders to put the Thunderbolt turret down, but he will do so, and then he'll come up and around this direction, angling on my Epsilon. Now, this is not a misjudgment necessarily on Rob's part, but he wasn't really aware of what he was getting into when he sent the Intruder up against the Epsilon, which is, in short, a fairer fight than he would necessarily have been hoping for. He didn't need to take this fight, but he was aware of the threat the Epsilon posed. But when fighting an Intruder, that's a fight that is more fair than the 38-point Intruder would like. So the Intruder is going to come up, peek through this building to C, and it's going to fire 4 dice on 13, and the Epsilon will fire 2 dice or 1 plus a special die on 13's back. That's it. That's the whole engagement. 4 dice 13s versus 2 dice 13s. That is not necessarily the fight that you want your 38-point elite single wound HMG to be taking, but you can't throw smoke to make it any better because both pieces have an MSV2. I mean, the Epsilon is just a couple of points cheaper than the Intruder and linkable but not camouflaged. And that link is going to make the difference in this case because the Epsilon lands a hit, it beats the Intruder in the face-to-face roll, and the single shot is enough to put the Intruder down. That's a pretty big deal. Now, the Intruder is not irrecoverable, but it's not really recoverable this turn. The resources that would be spent getting it back up don't really exist. The Dactari does not have the orders, and that's going to pretty much doom the Intruder to lying here unconscious for the remainder of the game. That's a really big deal. That is the kind of like, I am not upset getting lucky in this matchup because the caliber of player that Rob is, I mentioned he's won CanCon, you need a bit of luck from time to time to win games like that. And if this is how I get that little bit of luck, very happy with that. So the intruder goes down, which means that although I've lost a piece and Rob has lost a piece, I've come out of the attack, the Alpha Strike, with more of my force intact than Rob. Now, I do have the problem of McMurrough standing here, literally staring up the guts, but surely I have a solution for that, right? Yeah, no problem. We're going to be moving, we begin our turn. We don't really have any Impetuous to take because I do not want to give McMurrough, we've got a Varangian guard hanging out with the Epsilon down here. I do not want to give McMurrough the opportunity to dodge anywhere meaningful. So rather than Impetuous, we're just going to very carefully activate the Varangian and throw down some smoke, and then the Epsilon will come down these stairs and start putting hell of a lot of gunfire into McMurrough. And it should be a fairly good face-to-face roll. It's 5 dice 13s versus 1 dice 16s, but McMurrough wins, and then McMurrough wins again. He just makes his way forward. I think I land some hits on him once, but he just uses that to guts into cover, which actually gets him forward. And at that point, we need to just stop taking this fight. I could theoretically put a five volley shot into him at about 10 inches, but at that point he will chain rifle me back. And while I can recover my Epsilon with the Doctor, we have too many other things that we want to accomplish this turn. I cannot afford to have the whole turn just be, I shot McMurrough a little bit. There's other stuff that is more important, and one of my cardinal rules for Mindwipe is if you can, press a button on the first turn. Spoiler alert, we're not going to be able to on the first turn in this case, because Massey Morans are a very powerful defense, but I can't let the game get away from me just zeroing in on McMurrough. So during these engagements, I have declared Discover against the Bandit, and I have rediscovered it through Camouflage, just because you can declare Discover, and then I shot McMurrough. McMurrough survived, but I did reveal the Bandit, so the Epsilon is going to pull back and at least get one kill, putting the Bandit to unconscious with a volley of fire, and just leaving McMurrough out of this. He wanted it more. McMurrough has made his way up to here. That's going to be my problem for next turn. I can't afford to keep zeroing in on him because we have other stuff that has to be done. In Combat Group 2, the engineer is going to roll up his sleeves and go about fixing the things that need to be fixed. He's going to recover the total reaction bot and place a turret. It'll go down on these stairs or something like that. We will use Tactical Awareness to reposition the Roadbot just to try and put some cover on McMurrough, so the Roadbot will end up moving around to here, and the Oko itself will move around to watch this objective. And then in Combat Group 1, we'll be moving out the team of the Psychop, Shona, and the Kappa Hacker. So they're going to be moving up and around this space here, and what we're going to be trying to do, optimally, is kill that Massey Moran and then get to the objective. It's not going to be that simple. Rob's defense is very good. If I want to get to the Massey Moran, I need to, rather than just jump up, because Shona has super jump, she could just bound up into close combat with it this way, but if she does that, she will come through line of sight of the Wildcat team and probably die. So she has to approach this direction, which poses other problems. Ultimately, what we're going to be doing is moving sort of up these staircase and around this way. Shona will move through first, and she will dodge on 17s comfortably, disarming the first of the Moran's crazy koalas. I will then take kind of like a long-range and unsuccessful engagement with the Psychop against this Massey Moran here, which is actually moved up and around a little bit at this point. Unable to deal with it, the range is too significant. I get targeted for my troubles, but Rob does not have a guided missile. We will then be moving Shona up and around, dodging out, and then up and around into close combat. She moves in and completely aces, as expected, the Massey Moran, who has the good sense not to try and fight her, and instead just places down another koala. Okay, we are not getting to the objective this turn, but we have begun to clear the defense. That team will end up just leaving Shona there. The plan is going to be, and the plan will be successful, Shona's just going to dodge. The first time Shona gets an ARO, she's just going to dodge, which will trigger the man trap. That will be fine. This is a problem for a later turn. The Psychop and the Kappa have to pull back, and they pull back and place down a Thunderbolt turret. And that's the bulk of the turn. So, what have I and have I not accomplished? I have not pressed a button. Rob knows where he needs to go in order to secure a decisive scenario advantage. I'm on 0 points. However, attritionally, I've put down an intruder, I've put down a bandit, and I've put down a Massey Moran. And I've lost nothing because my Thunderbolt turret is up. That's a pretty solid spot under normal circumstances to be going into a second turn. It's just that we are presently well behind on scenario. And so my plan at this point basically becomes, I will attempt to recover at least the objective next turn, and I will try and bleed Rob out as badly as possible, over the time that I have in order to build a position where I can just make an uncontested run on whatever server I have on turn 3. This is not a great plan in Mindwipe. Ideally, you want to be pushing forward, taking space, and making those attacks on the objective easy, and we can see Rob playing this scenario really, really nicely. He has pieces aggressively staged that can push into servers in my deployment zone without having to spend loads of orders moving. I don't have the same luxury, but if I preserve my order count, maybe I will be able to give myself that option by the time turn 3 rolls around. So jumping into the beginning of turn 2, we can see where McMurray has ended up. And yep, this is going to be a little bit of a saga. Now, as much as Rob has gotten unlucky in his first turn of the game with the intruder going down, the tables will turn a little bit here with McMurray electing to make the impetuous movement. He makes the impetuous movement here, and in the process, he is shot by a total reaction bot, a Thunderbolt turret, a Panzerfaust, a chain rifle, and a +1 special die boarding shotgun. He gets hit multiple times. He gets hit 7 times, mostly by damage 6 weaponry, and he takes 0 damage. Now, doing a little bit of quick math, 7 saves needing usually 10s to pass suggests that on average he'd take maybe 3.5, maybe 3, maybe 4 wounds, but he is totally fine. No damage at all, which lets him then comfortably move into the objective, and he's good enough in close combat that he one-shots it. He's not guaranteed to, he usually only inflicts 2 or 3 saves, but the damage is very, very high, and it's armor piercing, and so he puts it down. He does get wounded in the process of doing this. The beta trooper finally puts a slug into his head, which puts him in the wounded state, but Rob elects at that point quite sensibly to decide that McMurray is now my problem. I can spend orders killing him in my turn. He's done what he needed to do, and any further movement by him at this stage probably gets him knocked unconscious, right? His luck is not going to last forever. He is wounded. There is a chain rifle and a shotgun looking at him. Best for him to stop now. Oh, also, something I forgot to mention, the very last order of Rob's turn, the very, very last order of Rob's previous turn, when he had McMurray sitting here, was to throw a spec fire grenade 16 inches and take out my Epsilon. That was certainly a thing. He needed 7 to hit. However, Beta Trooper Doctor took care of all of that. Not to worry, Beta Trooper back on deck. Anyway, Epsilon back on deck. But anyway, so McMurray is going to end up having destroyed a server, and this is more of that kind of this is the thing that can happen during this scenario, where we look at the scenario position now. I have not pressed a button. Rob has pressed a button and killed one of the decoy servers. If nothing else changes, he just has to hold, and he's significantly up on scenario. I have 2 more turns to play. It'll be fine, but it's one of those things where it's like you can see this scenario get away from you if you are forced to defend. And Rob is going to continue to attack this turn. There'll be a bunch of engagements with the Wildcats. They're going to be shooting and putting down, killing turrets effectively. It will take the Wildcat HRL a few orders, but what it is eventually able to do is move up and around this balcony and then lean out. Half of its base can extend over the balcony. That puts a bunch of shots down range, which will put down the total reaction bot to unconscious level 2, and also put down the adhesive turret here, shooting through smoke just for advantage, but does make it a little bit more difficult for the Wildcat, but puts both of them down. Now we then have a run from Billy. In fairness, what actually happened is that at this point, Rob immediately went to land his Hellcat, and I'm like, oh, I think I can still see you with some stuff. And he's like, oh shit, yep, you're right, this is the only legal place. So we wound that back, and I kind of pretended that I had never seen the Hellcat, and Billy begins a run. So Billy comes wherever it's standing. Billy is sitting down, yep, here on these stairs. He starts his run up and around over the high ground, and he's doing something very specific here. Now, he gives Shona Carano a dodge, which triggers the Crazy Koala, gets her to a slightly safer position. He continues up and all the way around to here, and any attempts I might make to stop him ultimately fail because he gets to run actually around this side of the high ground, and specifically what he's doing is trying to get just to this point here. He will die to a volley of fire at that juncture, but that takes out an EM mine that is hanging out in this doorway laid by a Raven Eye officer. With the EM mine down, the Hellcat can now land, and so the Hellcat whoops down to here. Now, I do attempt to dodge when Billy makes the run at me. It becomes obvious. At that point, I'm like, okay, I actually know that you have a Hellcat, but what you're doing here is really telegraphing it. So at this point, I'm going to start declaring some dodges to try and get line of sight back to the objective. This Ochre Copper bot, frankly, is not positioned particularly well. It's prone behind that barricade. It should be facing back toward the objective. This is just me not playing particularly well, and I fail those dodges. The Hellcat lands on 15s and then moves to place a decharge on the objective. I get my dodges when it lands, and a volley of fire puts it down to dead, but it places the decharge successfully. At this point, it's my turn to get lucky with armor rolls, and the objective is fine. It actually takes no damage. Now, decharges only have about a 30-something% chance. It's like a 1 in 3 chance for a decharge to actually, I think it's like 35%. I did the math on this after the game. It's about a 35% chance for a single decharge to put an objective down. So the failure of this attack run on the balance of probabilities is not hugely unlikely, but I do nevertheless breathe a sigh of relief. And that's about all of the effort that Rob can put in this particular turn. But he is, again, like he's clawing out scenario advantage. I have accomplished no mission objectives at this point. If the game ended now, it would be like a 5-0 win Rob's way. Or 5-1, more accurately, probably. I need to claw back some advantage, but I'm not going to do it this turn. I cannot get to Rob's deployment zone this turn. I am still pinned all the way back in my own DZ, but we can now finally push out and start accomplishing a few things. The main objective this turn is to reconstitute any forces that we have lost. So, yep, the total reaction point is going to come back. Turrets are going to come back down. And the fire team, consisting of the Psychop, is going to push out. She'll reset along the way. I think it'll take her 2 resets. There'll be another volley of fire against the Massey Moran that accomplishes nothing due to range, before the Psychop gets herself up onto this building and starts putting fire down into the Jaguars. 2 rounds of shooting later, and 2 Jaguars are dead. And that gets the Kappa hacker onto, because there's a Panzerfaust watching over this objective line. That gets a Kappa hacker onto this objective, presses the button, and then hangs out behind this building, and that reveals this beacon to be the one with the AI. Now, in the same way that Rob has rolled basically the worst possible one on his side, I have rolled basically the worst possible one on my side, because that is the Link team that is bang in the middle of all of Rob's defenses. The maximum amount of stuff is concentrated around that console. It's where his Wildcat team is, it's where his surviving Jaguars are, it's where Jazz and Billy, it's where Jazz is, Billy obviously being dead. I am not getting it to it this turn. I had a dream that maybe if this one back here turned out to be real, I could get Shona through to it this turn. Not happening on this one, and we just don't have that many orders left anyway. It's been very slightly too awkward to get the Psychop forward. The Massey Moran hanging out here is just, it's got slightly too much enfilade fire. It's watching across the table like this. The flash pulses are coming down and they're very annoying, etc. And I have to recover things. I do spend some more orders with the Epsilon, trying to take face-to-face rolls with the Wildcat. I get 1 volley of shots through it, passes its save, and it guts back into total cover. I could try and keep going after it, but it's just not worth trying to do. I have other things that had to be accomplished, and so we should have progressed through as best we can. It is not a hugely glamorous turn, but I have pressed a button, and at this point, Rob has hemorrhaged just an absolute ton of resources. He doesn't really have much gas left in the tank. And as we jump through to the final turn, really what he's looking to do is, if he can, make a run and kill the AI server, but otherwise just set up to defend. At this juncture, beginning of turn 3, Shona Carano is standing up on this building here, and she represents the most clear and present danger. So the lieutenant, Lieutenant Mobile Brigada, is going to have a crack at it. He's going to take a couple of shots into her, but he will be taking turret fire from a turret that the Psychop has placed on this rooftop. And basically just a whole bunch of shots later, nothing has happened other than that Mobile Brigada has gone down. That is one of the many casualties over the course of this. Actually, in fact, I think in every game I've played with this list, a Thunderbolt turret has killed exactly one thing, but that one thing has been like 30 points worth of troopers every single game. And yeah, that is basically what will happen if you spam out Thunderbolt turrets and adhesive turrets, but in particular Thunderbolt turrets. If you just spam them out enough, sooner or later they will get lucky. And at that point, the fact that you've paid 3 points for the turret on the Psychop, 8 points for the baggage, and a bunch of orders, they pay themselves back due to just sheer chance eventually will make that break. Now, Rob does not have a ton of orders left. He's got a few, and he's going to have a go at it. He consolidates his combat groups, and Jazz is going to make the run. She's going to come out and around this way, move up in this direction. Now, I attempt a discover at her with Shona Carano, but fail because she's in Cyber Mask, right? Don't make the roll. I think I roll like a 17. And so she continues. And at this point, as she moves up here, Andromeda finally gets a chance to show her quality. Now, in this particular game, the only relevant thing that Andromeda has that is remotely relevant to the game state is a good enough fizz, a long dodge distance, and a fat ass base. And so Andromeda makes a dodge roll, and she goes 4 inches this direction. This is just in response to Jazz approaching, and Andromeda pinches off most of the approach angle just because she's fat. Jazz goes to squeak around, and Andromeda dodges again, and once again pinches off the approach angle, and at that point Jazz just can't get around and get to the objective. She doesn't have enough orders left. She needed to really, she had, even under optimal circumstances, moving in a straight line, she'd have had one order to have a go. That one order would potentially have been enough. In this case, it doesn't do it. Jazz is left kind of in the open, not able to accomplish anything, and we go. It's my turn. We're going to have a crack at the server. Now, the actual line of play, we still need to clear a few things, but this is where the Roadbot and Oko duo are going to show off a little bit, and they're going to move up and around to here. On the way through, I will ignore the Massai Moran, and I will declare Forward Observer a couple of times with +1 special die at Rob's HVT, which accomplishes my objective, which is to Forward Observe the HVT twice. And then the Roadbot comes out and around this way to engage the Jaguar, and the Oko moves up at the same time. Now this prompts an ARO from the Wildcat hacker, who oblivions the Roadbot, but the Oko has gotten into range as part of that move, which means that I can then have my Sarko activate. It's up here at this point. It's just going to pop down relatively safely, not into line of sight of anything, and it's going to reveal and use my repeater to put Trinity into the Wildcat. Now, we had actually forgotten that the Tinbot -6 was dead at this point, which makes this a really favorable face-to-face roll for me, but regardless, Trinity was enough, puts the Wildcat down, and that's basically that. At that point, it's nice and clear. The Sarko can move up and around this way, crawling over the bridge, get into zone of control of the server with the real AI in it, and just zap it. It takes like 3 or 4 orders, but I zap it and put it down. It took enough effort to put down the server that I didn't have enough orders for Shono Karano to go on a suicide run into the other one, just couldn't quite make it. It took every order that I have to put the server down, but that does put the server down, and I've done a classified, and it's Rob's server with the AI, which in this particular case, at the 11th hour, brings the win to Starmada. Now, just because that was one game, I played 3 games over the course of an event. I'm not going to go through full recaps of the others, but I'm going to just quickly jump into and highlight some plays that were made in, and weaknesses of sort of like the list in this Starmada approach, in some other games really quickly. So this is the list that I would play in the other 2 games, and although I think I need to lean back off of the Marksman Rifle Roadbot, it represents a list that is compromising a little bit less for scenario, and I'm quite comfortable playing this even into Countermeasures and particularly into Cryogenics because it has lots of doctors. The main differences are that it cuts both Shona Carano and the Sarko Killer Hacker, which actually is a fairly solid piece, and instead gets in another Roadbot Oko duo and a Fuzzbot. And a second Varangian. Now, I actually think we probably, or cuts the total reaction bot as well. I actually think probably would lean back away from a few of the changes in this list. The Roadbot Marksman Rifle, it's just too low damage to reliably perform. It's too hackable. I covered that all in the first list construction sort of talk through, but the Andromeda is still in this list. The Epsilon Beta Trooper is still in this list, and if I was to run double Roadbot duo, I think I would definitely take both Roadbots as paramedics just for the Panzerfaust for defensive purposes. Otherwise, many similar elements. I only had so much time to practice for the event. Now, in this game, as a very quick recap, we're playing against Vanilla Ariadna, and Vanilla Ariadna with a Schoenborg. And this actually showcases one of the weaknesses that this list has, actually that even the one with Shona Carano wouldn't, which is that a tag appears on the battlefield. And as good as the Epsilon is, it's not going to be able to really put down a tag because the tag's armor is sufficient to no-sell the HMG. And we would actually have, due to a little bit of a quirk of dice, it's a Schoenborg that would be able to, over the course of the game, pick up 2 auto repair kits. So suffice to say, I did not kill it over the course of the game, and realistically would not have been able to. Even Andromeda is not particularly good at killing a Schoenborg or a tag with a heavy flamethrower. She can potentially brick it, but she's going to move in with her heavy flamethrower. She's going to move in with her Zapper and Guard. It's going to respond with a heavy flamethrower and just try and trade its way away. And the kind of best case scenario there is that maybe she survives the heavy flamethrower and successfully zaps it, at which point she can feasibly kill it. But it's not a sure thing. Shona Carano, on the other hand, can easily dodge a heavy flamethrower, dodging on 17s. If she gets into close combat, the tag is dead as hell. And so I kind of felt in this matchup the lack of like heavy armor piercing shooting. And that, for that reason, for example, would consider cutting that Roadbot Marksman Rifle Oko duo for something that can otherwise accomplish a little bit more. However, the Roadbot Paramedic would do great work. It's great in Cryogenics, able to zip around and press a whole bunch of buttons. I was able to press 3 buttons over the course of this game and get a dominant Master Breacher. One of the issues that Rudy had in this particular game is that apart from the Schoenborg, he didn't have a good Master Breacher. He chose an Apache instead because in this case, there were just not a lot of good places that he felt he could put down a dominant Master Breacher. The best place really would have been hanging out up here behind this objective. Sorry, behind this terrain piece, whereas I was able to just get Andromeda in a nice safe space and have her dominate quadrant the entire game, and eventually this game would be decided mostly by asymmetric play. Lots and lots of Epsilon shooting would put down a Vistral and linked Briscard MSV1. By the way, one of the weaknesses of Epsilon-style MSV2 shooting is that even just an MSV1 really drops the negative modifiers imposed by the Epsilon down. The smoke goes to -3, mimetism is ignored, which means that just an MSV1 is ignoring 6 points of penalty. And I actually got pretty hard stalled out by a Briscard Moblo team for like a significant portion of the game. Didn't lose any face-to-face rolls to them, it just took ages, and one of them got paramedic back up eventually. Still, with the scenario lead from pressing 3 buttons, killing Rudy's Master Breacher, having my own dominate, I was able to just not fight the Chernobog and just push through. Like it shot a whole lot of turrets, it shot a whole lot of robots. They're durable, it would be fine. I took a bunch of damage, but just clawed my way through scenario, eventually getting to a win at the end of this one, off the back of that steady and sustained points accumulation over the course of the game. Now, the third and final game was against vanilla JSA, local player Matty, who is doing his best to work through all of the different JSA factions to sort of see what it is that he likes, and he's on a little bit of a tragic push with vanilla JSA at the moment. There is some stuff to vanilla JSA, but it's kind of like, yeah, Hadamoto are really good. You could also have them in Shinden Butai. There are a few pieces in vanilla that you get that you don't get in Shinden Butai, and some of those pieces potentially make things like the Border Bash tournament coming up, mission lineup, a little more manageable. I am not convinced, but credit to him for exploring. And this would be a game where he would get to try out. This would be an event where he would only lose one game over the course of 3, and it would be this game of Countermeasures. And frankly, the bulk of the tempo was set over the course of the first turn. I won first turn, I went first. Downsides in this particular case of going first were that the first like 6 objectives that we flipped were all just HVT ones. And so I consumed all of Manny's HVTs very early in the scenario, and then just couldn't actually do classifieds after that in some cases. But that was all a little bit moot because the game can be summarized as Andromeda reserve over infiltrated to here. I got some smoke down and covered and put down a total reaction bot. And then she moved out and around, and Maddie's Hadamoto was deployed here behind this building. And he didn't have chain of command. I could just see there was no chain of command profile. That is something he will be changing about his lists after this, because Andromeda, in active turn, is just the same nightmare she always was. She moved around here, standing about 8 inches away from the Hadamoto, and Maddie looked at me and said, "What are my options here?" And I said, they're not good. If you want to defend against guard, you have to declare CC attack, and if you do that, I will zapper you. If you dodge, I will declare CC attack using guard, and I will kill you. And he's sort of like, yeah, that's kind of bad, isn't it? Can I guts against guard? Nope, it's not a ballistic skill attack, it's not a hacking attack, it's a CC attack, and you don't get guts against CC attacks. So you are if you just dodge, you are there until you die. And so, mostly out of spite, he elected to declare a CC attack, just stop me from guarding, and I zapped him, and then I killed him, and that put him loss of lieutenant on the first turn, as well as down one of the best pieces in his entire list, and he kind of tilted a little bit at that juncture. I was able to spend a bunch of orders, I have an Evo hacker, a lot of orders in this version of the list, accomplish some classifieds, but mostly what I otherwise did is just threw down an absolute ton of turrets, and with the Hadamoto down, his list just didn't really have any good guns for fighting them, or much in the way of smoke or visibility control, and so there were entire turns of Samurai just banzaiing into turrets, firing off contenders and not killing them, and having those face-to-face rolls fail and damage taken. And the game just very badly snowballed after that. I did have to trade models away over the course of the game, but even by the end of my second turn, I was at a point where I had 5 classifieds and Manny had 1, and that's just really, really difficult to recover from in countermeasures. You have to keep that score as even as possible, or inflict a bunch of terrible damage to your opponent. Manny wasn't really able to do either. So this was very much a game in which Andromeda got to shine, but she has done well for 30 points in basically all of the games that I have played her in. So that's the unexpected takeaway of this particular showcase. Yes, playing Starmada without a Zeta is super doable, very, very much in N5, at least as far as it currently feels in the edition. But yeah, Andromeda is pretty good again. That's kind of cool. She's a fun piece to play. She has that unique mix of capabilities that still, like, when she hits exactly the right setup, she feels genuinely unfair, but she doesn't always get to do that. But even in the games where she's just been used as a defensive piece, in some practice games, I had her just defending an objective in supplies. And that combination of a zapper and good close combat just made her really difficult to approach, and mimetism and armor and no wound cap, etc. So she was a great piece. The faction in general was great to play. So thank you, Vicky, very much for the challenge, and I hope you've enjoyed this 1+2 small battle reports as a bit of a showcase of Starmada playing without a Zeta. As a reminder, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member. I take requests, content requests, when I'm deciding what to record, what armies to play. I consult the grand list of things that people have requested, and those requests come from channel supporters either on YouTube or Buy Me a Coffee. So big thanks as always to everyone who has supported the channel so far. They enable me to continue doing games like this, reports like this. I hope very much that you've enjoyed them, and I'll see you next time.